15 handsome black stars who changed so much fans could barely recognize them. They were once remembered at their physical peak fast, commanding sharp and impossible to ignore. But after the fame, the applause, and the years of public pressure, many of these men returned, looking almost unrecognizable. Some were changed by illness, some by trauma, some by survival itself. And behind every transformation is a story deeper than gossip and harsher than judgment. Stay with me, because the deeper this list goes, the more emotional, surprising, and uncomfortable the truth behind these Hollywood icons becomes. Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson did not become famous with the kind of body people admired from a distance. He became famous with the kind of body people feared up close. In the 1980s, he looked less like a traditional heavyweight champion and more like a weapon built for immediate damage. He was compact, explosive, low to the ground, and terrifyingly fast. When he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history at just 20 years old, the image locked itself into public memory forever. Tyson was not simply a boxer at his peak. He was a physical symbol of pressure, rage, discipline, and destruction. That version of him became so powerful that many people unconsciously believed it would last forever. But bodies built for war are rarely built for peace. Once the structure around Tyson's greatness began to disappear, the discipline that had once shaped every hour of his day no longer held the same force. The routines, the camps, the punishment, the purpose, all of it changed. Over time, the body the public associated with fear and domination began to reflect something else entirely. Weight gain, pain, appetite, grief, excess aging, and deep emotional struggle all started to leave visible marks. Tyson later spoke openly about how far that shift had gone, admitting that at one point he had reached nearly 350 pounds and no longer liked what he saw or felt. What happens when a man spends his youth becoming a myth and the rest of his life trying to survive being human again? That question sits at the center of Mike Tyson's transformation. His changed body was not just a matter of age or appearance. It became physical evidence of everything fame could not protect him from. Joint pain, arthritis, shame, emotional instability, and the collapse of the machine that had once kept him razor sharp all became part of the story written across his frame. Yet that is also what makes Tyson's later image so powerful. He did not remain frozen inside the body that terrified the world. He lived long enough to become something more complicated, a man carrying damage, memory, honesty, and effort in plain sight. Mike Tyson changed dramatically, but the real shock is not that the body changed. It is that the world expected it not to. George Foreman. George Foreman was never introduced to the world as a delicate kind of champion. He came forward like force itself, a heavyweight whose body looked built for impact rather than elegance. In his early prime, he stood tall, broad, hard, and intimidating, the kind of fighter who did not need speed or flair to frighten an arena. He won Olympic gold, then took the heavyweight crown in 1973, and at that stage his physique matched the public idea of destruction, thick, powerful, and tuned for punishment. That image stayed in the minds of boxing fans for years, which is why the body people saw later felt so surprising. But George Foreman's later shape did not arrive as a symbol of ruin. It arrived as evidence that life had changed. After his first retirement, the regime that once ruled his body no longer held the same control. His appetite became part of the story. His frame grew fuller. The severe outline of the young destroyer softened into something rounder, older, and far more approachable. When many younger fans first encountered him during the comeback years, they were not meeting the menacing champion from old footage. They were meeting a heavier man whose smile, warmth, and humor stood in sharp contrast to the terror older fans remembered. Can a body change so much that people mistake reinvention for decline? That question sits at the center of George Foreman's story. Unlike many men whose changed appearance becomes a target for mockery, Foreman turned his later body into part of a second public life. He came back to boxing, won a version of the heavyweight title again at 45, and later became even more commercially recognizable through television advertising and his larger-than-life charm. His body changed dramatically, but the change did not strip away his power. It simply moved that power into a different form. George Foreman's later frame told a story about age appetite, faith recovery, and a man who refused to stay trapped inside the silhouette of his own legend. Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy became a star in a body that seemed engineered for timing. In the early 1980s, he moved with the speed of someone who was always half a second ahead of everybody else in the room. On Saturday Night Live and stand-up, and then across film after film, his whole presence depended on quickness. He was lean, sharp, loose, and alive in a way that made even stillness feel like it was about to burst into motion. That became part of his legend. People did not only remember the jokes, they remembered the body delivering them, alert, spring-loaded, and impossibly young. That is why his later appearance created such a strong contrast. When Eddie Murphy re-emerged in the later phase of his career, he no longer looked like the man racing through Beverly Hills Cop or firing through a stand-up set with the energy of a controlled explosion. He looked fuller, broader, calmer, and more settled inside himself. The shift was not dramatic because of scandal or public collapse. It was dramatic because it reflected a man who had stepped away from the machine that first made him famous. He later said he had spent years on the couch, tired after working non-stop for so long, and that his priorities had changed. Home, children, family, and peace had begun to matter more than maintaining the old pace. Is the real shock that a star changed physically, or that he finally stopped performing youth for people who never wanted him to age? That question defines Eddie Murphy's place on this list. His body did change, but the deeper transformation was philosophical. The younger frame belonged to a man inside constant production. The later frame belonged to someone living an actual life outside the pressure of permanent output. Eddie Murphy's later image does not suggest defeat. It suggests release. The body that once served the myth began serving the man instead, and maybe that is what unsettles audiences most. They do not simply miss how he looked. They miss the illusion that icons can remain suspended forever at the exact moment we first loved them. Martin Lawrence. Martin Lawrence's early stardom was built on velocity. In the 1990s, he did not just seem funny, he seemed physically overclocked. On Martin, and in the early Bad Boys years, his whole body looked tuned to react before thought could even catch up. He darted through scenes, twisted expressions in a blink, bounced between characters, and carried a wiry force that made his comedy feel almost athletic. That version of him became fixed in memory because it matched the pace of the era that made him famous: loud, fast, kinetic, and relentless. What makes his later transformation feel more serious than simple age is that his body had already survived an extreme event many people forget when comparing old clips to later appearances. In 1999, while trying to lose weight for a movie role, Martin pushed himself into dangerous conditions, running in extreme heat while wearing heavy clothing. The result was catastrophic. He collapsed, his temperature reportedly spiked to 107 degrees, and he fell into a coma caused by severe heat exhaustion. That moment matters because it reframes everything that came later. The body people judged in later years was not just older. It was a body that had already been driven past a dangerous threshold and brought back. Do we judge a changed body too quickly? Because we refuse to remember what that body has already survived. That question gives Martin Lawrence's story its real weight. The contrast between the Quicksilver comic force of the 1990s and the fuller, slower, older man seen later is undeniably visible. But the truth beneath that contrast is not lazy gossip. It is survival recovery age and the natural shift that comes when a life no longer demands the same punishing speed. Martin Lawrence did change dramatically after fame, but the man at the center of that changed frame never vanished. He kept working, kept answering the public, and kept refusing the rumor that a different body must mean a broken life. Tracy Morgan. Tracy Morgan first became unforgettable through motion. His comedy did not sit still. It jumped, twisted, bounced, and attacked the room from strange angles. on Saturday Night Live and 30 Rock. His physical energy was part of the joke long before the punchline landed. He looked like a man wired directly into chaos. Quick, loose, unpredictable, and alive in a way audiences could recognize instantly. That is why the body people saw later felt so startling. The difference was not merely a matter of years passing. It was the visible evidence of trauma. The turning point was the 2014 crash. A Walmart truck struck the limousine he was riding in, killing James McNair and leaving Tracy Morgan catastrophically injured. He spent 2 weeks in a coma, endured severe damage, including a shattered femur and facial fractures, then lived through a recovery process that forced him into a wheelchair for months and required him to relearn basic functions. That kind of survival changes a person at the level of muscle balance, speed, posture, and endurance. It also changes public memory. People keep comparing the later body to the old one without fully accounting for the violence that happened between them. Would any of us expect a body to look unchanged after catastrophe if the person inside it had nearly died? That question sits at the center of Tracy Morgan's physical story. His altered frame was never about neglect, and it was never about surrender. It was about what remains after the body has been broken and then asked to keep living anyway. Even his later public comments about weight medication and trying to manage his health fit into that larger reality. His body changed because survival changed it. Tracy Morgan still carries the same comic spirit, but the body attached to it now tells a harsher truth. Some people do not return from disaster as restored versions of who they were. They return as living evidence of what they endured. That is why his transformation hits so hard. It does not suggest decline. It suggests aftermath. Forrest Whitaker. Forrest Whitaker was never sold to the public as a sleek Hollywood heartthrob, but in his earlier years he carried a leaner and more watchful screen presence. There was a tightness to him, something alert and searching that fit the young men he played in films like Platoon and Bird. He looked like an actor still moving upward, still hungry, still physically aligned with the urgency of the roles finding him. That is why the change became noticeable. It unfolded in front of the public at the same time his artistic stature was becoming much larger. The major pivot came with The Last King of Scotland. Whitaker did not just act Idi Amin. He built himself toward the role, adding substantial weight to embody a man whose physical command was part of his political terror. That decision mattered because the change did not vanish as soon as the film ended. Over time, the heavier frame stayed, and with it came a shift in how he was seen. The public no longer looked at him as the lean supporting actor from earlier decades. They increasingly saw a fuller, denser, more imposing figure whose body now matched the gravity of the men he was trusted to portray. Did the body change after fame, or did it simply grow into the weight of the roles, the years, and the authority he eventually carried? That question gives Forrest Whitaker's transformation its real meaning. His later appearance was dramatic, yes, but not in a shallow tabloid way. He did not become a joke. He became heavier in almost every direction at once, physically, emotionally, professionally, and symbolically. Presidents, crime bosses, leaders, haunted men, and moral centers all fit him differently once the earlier silhouette gave way. Forrest Whitaker's changed body did not reduce his power. It amplified it. What audiences were seeing was not a star losing control of his image, but an actor aging into a more commanding kind of presence that youth alone could never have created. Anthony Anderson. Anthony Anderson's story stands out because his body changed in the middle of a much larger decision about how he wanted to live. For years, he was widely recognized as the broad, funny, confident presence who could fill a sitcom frame with warmth and ease. Even when he was heavier, he did not carry himself like a man ashamed of taking up space. That confidence became part of his appeal. But behind the public image was a health reality that made the body impossible to treat as a side issue forever. Type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol eventually turned his physical story into something much more serious than celebrity appearance talk. That is what makes his transformation meaningful. He did not simply wake up one day and decide he wanted a different shape for cosmetic reasons. He realized the consequences of not changing were too real to ignore. Weight loss in his case became tied to survival discipline, medical responsibility, and the fear of repeating damage he had already seen in his own family. The difference people noticed was visible, but the real turning point was internal. Diet changed. Exercise became consistent. The body began reflecting not vanity, but intervention. This was a man trying to stay alive in public while millions of people were only beginning to notice the outside. How often do we notice a celebrity's body only after it changes, instead of paying attention when his life quietly changes first? That question gives Anthony Anderson's story its force. He belongs on this list not because he became unrecognizable in a tragic sense, but because his body became the visible record of a private decision to take health seriously before the cost became fatal. That matters especially for older audiences who understand how diabetes can move through families and through time. Anthony Anderson's later appearance tells a different kind of story from many others here. It is not about collapse. It is about interruption. A man seeing the road ahead clearly enough to decide he did not want to keep going the same way. Cedric the Entertainer. Cedric the Entertainer became famous with a body that matched his command. He was never presented as fragile or hyper-athletic, but in the breakthrough years, his frame looked solid, tailored, and controlled in a way that fit the polished confidence of his comedy. On stage, he wore the body the same way he wore the suit, like a man fully in possession of himself. By the time audiences locked in that image during the great stand-up years, especially around the turn of the 2000s, they had frozen him in a specific silhouette, broad but trim enough to move with ease, stylish enough to make authority look effortless. What changed later was not simply weight. It was the rhythm of his life. As the years passed, his work evolved away from non-stop touring velocity and toward producing hosting, acting, and longer-form television visibility. That shift matters because the body often follows the life. The external pressure that once kept him in one kind of stage shape no longer operated the same way. His frame grew fuller, softer, heavier looking, and more mature. Yet what is interesting in Cedric's case is that the change never arrived through public scandal or humiliation. It happened gradually in plain view while his career remained stable and his authority remained intact. Do we sometimes call a man changed when the real story is simply that his life stopped demanding the body we first met him in? That question sits directly inside Cedric's story. His later comments about taking health more seriously, losing weight, and making changes show that the transformation was real enough for him to address himself. But the deeper meaning is not decline. It is transition. Cedric the Entertainer did not become less himself as his body changed. If anything, he became more settled into the version of success that lasts longer than a peak silhouette ever could. The build shifted, the pace shifted, the image shifted, but the ease, command, and control that made audiences trust him in the first place never left. Sinbad. Sinbad's early fame lived in motion. He did not simply stand on stage and deliver jokes. He moved through a room like the rhythm itself belonged to him. His comedy had bounce ease and a physical looseness that made his presence feel larger than the script or the set around him. That made him memorable. He seemed light on his feet even when he was commanding the entire room. Audiences remembered not only his voice but his movement, his timing, and the visible freedom inside the body that carried the performance. That is why the change after his stroke felt so heartbreaking. This was not a story of vanity, laziness, or a celebrity gradually letting time soften him. This was a body rewritten by medical crisis. After the blood clot traveled from his heart to his brain in 2020, everything that had once seemed so natural had to be relearned. Mobility, balance, posture, and endurance all became part of a fight for recovery. The surgeries, the induced coma, the ventilator, the long therapy, all of it transformed not just how he appeared, but how the public had to understand him. The body fans remembered belonged to one life. The body they saw later belonged to another one shaped by surviving a catastrophic interruption. If a man has to fight for every step again, what does it even mean to ask why he no longer looks the same? That question gives Sinbad's story its emotional force. He belongs here because the contrast is real, but the meaning of that contrast is much deeper than nostalgia. His changed frame is not proof that something was lost through neglect. It is proof that he remained present after nearly being taken away. When he reappeared publicly and later returned to acting, the old body did not come back. Something more difficult did a visible survivor. Sinbad's later appearance tells the truth that so many audiences resist. Recovery does not always restore the old image. Sometimes it creates a new one marked by struggle, effort, and the cost of staying alive. Tommy Davidson. Tommy Davidson became famous in a body that seemed built for spring tension. In the early 1990s, he moved with the speed of a man whose jokes began in his shoulders, then shot through his face, his legs, and his whole frame before the audience had fully processed what was happening. He was wiry, quick, hyper-alert, and physically elastic in a way that fit perfectly with sketch comedy and stage performance. That body became part of the memory people kept of him. It was not just that he was funny, it was that he looked like someone powered by pure momentum, which is why the later contrast became so noticeable. The man audiences saw years later no longer resembled that razor-thin burst of comic electricity. But the deeper story behind that change matters more than the surface. Tommy Davidson's life carried abandonment, pressure addiction, recovery, and the long toll of enduring a career and a private history at the same time. When a body moves through decades of that, it does not owe the public the same silhouette forever. The younger form belonged to a time of acceleration. The later form belonged to a man who had outlived it. How long is a performer expected to keep the same body just because fame once froze him inside it? That question sits at the heart of Tommy Davidson's story. People may think they are noticing weight gain, but what they are really seeing is time made visible. They are seeing a body that survived more than the audience was ever asked to carry. The change is dramatic, because memory is dramatic. The old image stays sharp, even while the real man continues living. Tommy Davidson belongs here not because his later body should be mocked or mourned, but because it reveals a hard truth about celebrity memory. The public often wants preservation, while life keeps insisting on transformation. His changed appearance does not erase the younger comic force. It proves he made it beyond him. David Alan Grier. David Alan Grier came to prominence in a body perfectly suited to speed. In the In Living Color years and through the high-energy television work that followed, he seemed built for switch-hitting performance. One character, then another, all delivered with a fast and loose physical intelligence. He was leaner, then sharper at the edges, and visibly connected to a style of comedy that depended on quick turns, expressive movement, and the feeling that he could pivot into anything at any second. That image stayed fixed in many viewers' minds for decades, but the man did not stay fixed. As the years moved on, his work shifted, his age shifted, and the body the audience had frozen in place also changed. That fuller, later frame mattered because even Grier himself acknowledged it publicly. He joked about needing to lose weight, spoke openly about gaining during the COVID period, and later embraced the fact that people now saw him differently. That honesty gives his transformation weight. It was not an illusion created by old clips and unkind comparisons. It was real, but it also meant something more than scale. His body had begun to match a different phase of career and identity. He was no longer the wiry disruptor of early television. He was becoming a more grounded, mature, and authoritative screen presence. Do we really believe a man should look like 1992 forever, just because that was the year we first decided he mattered? That question gives David Alan Grier's story its depth. His changed appearance is not merely about pounds. It is about casting age, tone, and the freedom to inhabit a different stage of life without apologizing for it. The public remembered one outline, but the real man kept evolving beyond it. David Alan Grier belongs here because he shows how dramatic transformation is often less about decline than about misaligned expectation. The audience clings to one old body. Life keeps building a new one. Andre Royo. Andre Royo's case is unusual because the body the public first attached to him was never really meant to be his natural body. His breakout identity came through Bubbles on The Wire, and that role was so physically convincing that it permanently altered how many viewers remembered him. They did not just remember a performance. They remembered a frame marked by depletion, need, fragility, and the visual language of addiction. That matters because it means the shock people felt later was not only about change. It was about discovering that the body they had mentally preserved was already a constructed hardship. Royo did not drift into that look casually. He shaped himself toward it through restriction, discomfort, and serious emotional preparation. So when the public later saw him healthier, fuller, better dressed, and visibly more whole, the effect was striking. They were not simply seeing an actor who had aged or gained weight. They were confronting the fact that the most famous version of his body had been built around deprivation in the first place. The changed appearance felt dramatic because the original image had burned itself into the culture so deeply. Did he really change after fame, or did fame trap him inside the wrong body from the very beginning? That is the question that makes Andre Royo's story so strong for this title. His transformation does not read like collapse, it reads like release. The gaunt image the public learned to associate with him belonged to pain, emptiness, and role-specific sacrifice. The later body belonged to a man walking free from one of television's most haunting physical identities. Andre Royo's story reminds people that sometimes the most shocking contrast is not between youth and age, but between the body that made someone famous and the body that finally reveals who he actually is when the performance ends. Gary Anthony Williams. Gary Anthony Williams belongs in this story for a reason many viewers do not expect. The body that made him instantly recognizable for years was large, memorable, and impossible to miss. Even when audiences did not know his name, they often knew the silhouette. It helped define how he was read on screen, and it became part of the package people attached to his comedy character work and voice presence. That is why the later transformation hit with such force. Unlike several others on this list, his changed appearance did not move toward heaviness. It moved dramatically away from it. Losing more than 160 pounds over time is not a small adjustment. It is the rewriting of a public shape. And what makes Gary Anthony Williams' story even more compelling is that he did not disappear while it happened. He kept working. He stayed visible. He continued building a career across television, film, voice acting, and comedy, while the audience watched a very different body emerge. That matters because it changes the meaning of the transformation. This was not a private retreat followed by a later surprise reveal. It was sustained change in full view, undertaken without surrendering the professional identity that had introduced him to people in the first place. How often do we say a star changed when what really happened is that he finally took ownership of a body the public had long treated as fixed? That question gives Gary Anthony Williams' story its power. His later appearance does not suggest erasure of the earlier man. It suggests intention, discipline, and a willingness to rewrite the version of himself that fame first circulated. He belongs here because the contrast is real and unmistakable, but the deeper message is not loss. It is agency. Fame presented one body to the world. Time, effort, and personal choice created another. And in that sense, his transformation may be one of the most quietly radical on the list. Orlando Jones. Orlando Jones first entered mainstream memory in a body that matched late 1990s speed. He was clean-cut, angular, restless, and verbally quick in a way that fit sketch comedy brand campaigns and light-footed film roles perfectly. When audiences locked in their image of him, they locked in that version sharp, fast, lean, and visually aligned with the pace of the era that made him famous. That is why his later presence created such a distinct contrast. It was not loud or sensational. It was simply undeniable. By the time he returned in more commanding roles, the body had shifted. He looked broader, fuller, older, and much more imposing than the version people remembered from earlier comedy and commercial years. What makes Orlando Jones's case interesting is that the transformation was not packaged around a major public confession, a dramatic health crisis, or a before and after narrative with neat numbers attached. There was no easy headline reducing it to one cause. Instead, the body changed as the work changed. The quick comic presence of the late 1990s evolved into something denser and more mythic, a man who could hold authority, anger, intellect, and gravity without needing the same youthful silhouette. Are we really seeing physical decline? Or are we just watching the body adapt to the kinds of roles, years, and emotional weight a man carries later in life? That question sits right inside Orlando Jones's story. He belongs here because the difference is visible, but the meaning of that difference is not shallow. It tracks a shift in identity and screen function. The body the public remembered belonged to the man selling punchlines and energy. The later body belonged to a man carrying a different kind of screen power. Orlando Jones's changed appearance does not read like collapse. It reads like evolution, time turning quickness into gravity and fame giving way to a presence no longer built to charm in 30 seconds, but to hold the room without rushing at all. Keenan Ivory Wayans. Keenan Ivory Wayans became famous in a body associated with command. In living color years, he was not merely part of the show. He was the center of its rhythm, the man whose slim frame, sharp dress, and forward-driving energy made the entire operation feel under control. He looked like someone building an empire in real time, and that image became fixed in the public imagination. It is easy to forget how much of authority on television depends not only on voice or power, but on the body carrying both. Keenan's early body projected speed, confidence, and total authorship. The contrast later came not because he vanished, but because he stepped into a different role. As his career moved further behind the camera and deeper into creating, directing, and producing, the public saw less of the host at the center and more of the architect behind the work. With that shift came a changed appearance, broader, older, fuller in face and frame, clearly no longer the lean frontman of 1990. But that is exactly what gives his story depth. The body changed at the same time the function changed. The visible host gave way to the builder, the foundation, the man whose power no longer needed to look youthful to be real. When a man stops standing in front of the machine and starts quietly running it, are we seeing decline or simply a different kind of power take shape? That question gives Keenan Ivory Wayans' transformation its meaning. He belongs on this list because the change is real, but the story is bigger than appearance. Fame froze one version of him while real life kept moving into another. The older frame the public sees now belongs to someone who did not disappear after success. He changed his position, and the body changed with it. Keenan's later presence does not erase the early image. It reveals what happened after it. The host became a builder. The face became the force behind the face, and the body learned how to carry a quieter kind of authority. Some people will look at these transformations and call them decline. Others will see something far more honest: bodies marked by trauma, survival, illness, age, recovery, and the private cost of living too long under public memory. And maybe that is the real question this story leaves behind. Did these stars truly change beyond recognition, or did we simply refuse to recognize what real life does after fame stops freezing a man at his peak? I want to hear your thoughts. Which transformation shocked you most, and which story hit the hardest? Leave your answer in the comments and follow and subscribe to Cine Legacy Vault Hollywood for more powerful Hollywood stories.